Hey everyone, welcome to Grit Files. I am here live broadcasting right from the middle of Collision Conference in the heart of downtown Toronto. As a Torontonian myself, it's wonderful to be here and to be amongst so many incredible founders, investors, and all kinds of fantastic folks, particularly the organizers who are behind the scenes. But boy, oh boy, let me tell you, Web Summit folks know how to run a conference. Everyone here is dedicated to bringing forward what's next and what's best when it comes to startup technology. And that concept of bringing new ideas forward is not new. There's a lot of pitch contests, there's a lot of tech conferences, all kinds of stuff. But this one, dang, it's just good. It's fantastic because they've got it so well oiled as a machine. I mean, again, this is the group that took the world's largest tech conference online right at the start of the pandemic. And they figured out how to do that and to deliver Collision from home. What that did for so many people and so many founders in particular was still give them the opportunity that they needed to be able to present their new ideas and get in front of founders and other founders, and more specifically, get in front of investors. And that's really important. We heard from Toronto Mayor John Tory this morning, who said that Toronto now represents the third largest tech hub in the world. That's incredible. And it hasn't been very slow growth by any means. You look at Silicon Valley, they've had over 50 years at this. Toronto's growth has been exponential in a relatively short period of time. Another thing that's really interesting is that Toronto here, with respect to the Collision Conference, enables more tech deals to be signed at this event than any other event. That's a legacy that people have to work really hard to stand up to. So let's talk about some of the things in that we're seeing here and what's going on. So one of the things beyond the impeccable organization and support of the group here, not to mention even enabling podcasting live from the event, that's pretty freaking cool, is that this conference has fantastic representation. So today we are in Canada, and we should acknowledge that today is National Indigenous Peoples Day. Many of the participants here acknowledged that, and what was really terrific to see is that diversity goes far beyond gender inclusion. Here there is racial inclusion, there is acknowledgement, there is everything that you want to see, and this really espouses the values of Canada as a country, and Mayor John Tory highlighted this in his address in the open Q&A with the audience. He spoke about how tech founders from other countries are interested in coming to Canada because they can take advantage, really, of the certainty that's here with respect to the stability in these values. And one of course, Canada's biggest hallmarks, biggest values is the move towards equity and equal representation. We all know that there's work to be done. This is not what I'm debating here, but the efforts are ongoing to have that level of representation. And here it's so wonderful to see. There were a couple of incredible Indigenous founders and businesses that I wanted to highlight. So the first one is called Kama.ai, and got a chance to chit-chat with Brian Ritchie. He's the founder and CEO of the company. And what they're doing is bringing humanity into artificial intelligence and conversation. So you're thinking, okay, that sounds kind of interesting. And there are movements, of course, with GPT-3 and other technologies to bring sentient and sentiment into the artificial intelligence. But what he's doing is bringing that level of conversation in and around a sense of community. He is focused on the Indigenous peoples, particularly as a member of Chapleau Creek Cree tribe. They've recently conducted a pilot that was at Chapleau Creek Cree tribe, and it was also with Moose Cree tribe. And what they did is they allowed people to have access to the platform and then tested out various things. Did they feel as lonely? Did they feel more connected? And the conversations were not limited to telehealth. The conversations and the AI-generated content was also around Indigenous values, beliefs, highlighting different things that people may or may not have known about Cree tribe or about some of the accomplishments of other Indigenous peoples. And the results were pretty incredible. People felt less lonely and had a greater sense of community. Now, if an AI bot can do that, that's all right. So that's Brian Ritchie of Comma.ai. But he wasn't the only Indigenous founder up here. We also got a chance to take a look at Keith McIntosh. He has founded Plato Testing, and he's tapped into a $40 billion untapped market. Now, this I was unaware of, but apparently this market size is growing simply because there are not enough people to do the quality assurance, the testing that needs to be done. And what he's done is worked with local Indigenous communities across Canada to bring them the level of training that they need so that they can provide the QA testing from some of the largest names in the tech industry. Just absolutely incredible. And what he said is, I'm not stopping at QA testing. We're going to enter the space of cybersecurity. So stay tuned. Watch this space. Another area of focus, at least for me particularly as a woman in tech who often features women on this podcast, is the founder group represented by the Women in Tech showcased here at the lounge. So there were a number of women, and I feel badly that I can't represent all of them, but you can only go to so many talks, and you're bouncing from one stage to the other stage, and you have to walk through a wall of people in between, so it's not the easiest thing to get everything covered, let me tell you. But I'm really glad that I had the opportunity to be introduced and to hear about the following companies. So one of them, called Share, but spelled X-A-R-E, right? Of course, because everybody has to spell things cleverly because all of the normal domains, like I'm sure share.com and everything else, were taken. So its founder, Padmini Gupta, has now gone on to, get this, are you sitting down? Found the world's largest fintech company. It's absolutely incredible. She began her presentation talking about how more than 4.5 billion people on this planet don't work. That means they don't have a direct source of income, but they still have to shop. And in fact, they control 25 trillion of the global economy. The challenge is they need to get their hands on some money. And so how can you do that? Well, we all know some of the e-payment systems and things, but what Share does a little differently is that they provide credit card access to your friends and family members. And yes, you can set the limit, so don't worry about that. So if you want to say $100 and you want to see where they shop, did they go shop on some online retail establishment that you approved of, or did they go to the dark web and take your credit card there? Well, you can control and track all of that. They've got already nearly 2 million users. It's just incredible. Check them out. Share, X-A-R-E. Another interesting company that caught my attention is one called Pok, P-O-K, and I think it is intended to sound like a little chicken going Pok, 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 because kids love that stuff. And so Dr. Cindy Hovington, what she did is she, through personal experience, because that's pretty much how every company gets founded, right? You try to do something and you can't find a solution for it, you get really frustrated, and then you decide, the hell with it, I'm just going to build my own freaking solution, and you do it. So Dr. Covington founded the company because she found that the toddlers, like her own and others that owned, I guess toddlers aren't owned by their friends. Let's catch that. And toddlers of friends of hers were not getting the stimulation that they needed with respect to games. Now, of course, every parent and every child wants to have screen time, right? It's always a little bit of a battle of wills, though, as to how much screen time that should be. So the way that they've set it up is that the screen time really is actually valuable because it's building the child's abilities to be able to engage and connect. So that was pretty impressive. Then again, here's another company right out of need. Hanna Asmussen from Norway has lived in 9 or 10 different countries, and she found that every time that she moved, of course there were all of the local challenges trying to get set up, finding lodging, all of this kind of thing, blending in with the community, figuring out all of the hotspots, all of the normal stuff. But what really irked her was the challenge when it comes to immigration attorneys. And so she's pretty much on a single-handed mission here to put immigration attorneys out of business. The software, which is called Localize, enables people to be able to connect with the resources they need when it comes to visa applications, finding lodging, getting all of that nasty documentation and paperwork stuff sorted out so that people can freely move around the planet, especially now. She showed some studies where in prior generations, only about 5% of executives at large-scale teams and companies were moving around and being able to have that opportunity and that privilege to live in different countries. Fantastic, but not so fantastic for everybody else who didn't have the chance to be able to travel. And now millennials, in a study that she cited, she didn't cite the reference, but just what she showed me, that over 80% of millennials are looking to travel worldwide and experience different countries. So there needs to be a solution that enables this. I think Localize is onto something there. Here's another one on the topic of being onto something: mental health. It doesn't need any introduction. We all know that mental health is, well, pretty much shattered across the planet, particularly in the US, with respect to all of the stuff going on, from contentious debates amongst our own politicians to fistfights in the streets to everything else. There's a whole lot of work to be done in the US. I think it's indicative of what's going on, that people are broken, and now as people are starting to go broke, we're starting to see that escalation in violence because people are frustrated and they can't find a way out. All right. So Dr. Emilia Molimpakis, she's the CEO and co-founder of Thymia, and she's tapping into how to be able to support mental health. And it's combining neuroscience with AI. In a nutshell, they've developed some games that are very sophisticated that can detect emotional and even physical, like with respect to facial expressions, nuances when it comes to trying to identify how that person may be feeling on key metrics like fatigue, like depression, like stress. And although the application seems like, oh, okay, that's the perfect thing where you want to be able to assess people at an individual level, think about the implications if you are traffic control or if you're in a military exercise with an active program ongoing, or other areas where you could be under extreme duress. You want to be able to monitor that safely and securely so that you can say, hey, wait a minute, it's time for a break. You are like way beyond the levels of stress that you should be. So take a look at that too. Now, let's switch gears and talk a little bit about investment, right? It's what everybody wants to know. So I've spent some time in the venture stage hearing about what's going on, and well, in a nutshell, it's not good, right? There is definitely a downward trend with respect to the appetite of investors. Now, that's not across the board. So before you start getting all anxious and going, oh my goodness, now like I'm never going to get funding, well, it certainly got a whole hell of a lot harder. So you need to be prepared for that. Where you might have had 100 no's before, well, now you might have to get 200, right? It's just not easy. And what the investors all highlighted is that the later that you are with respect to your company stage, the more difficult of a time you're going to have right now for fundraising. And they offered a lot of pity and empathy for those companies that were just at pre-IPO, because the bar has just gotten extremely high. Companies need to have 18 months, even up to 25 months of runway as they're coming into the IPO market, and that's just really hard to hit. So what we also heard is that this trend is consistent, that when you see so much of tech tanking, apparently portfolios have gone down about 30% over the last month alone. That's just an incredible drop. And it's largely because burn rates are too high, and that ARR to burn rate should be 1.5, maybe up to 2, they said, if you are in a super hyper growth of a company. But for the most part, people are seeing 3 to 5, and that is just not sustainable. So we got into some of the hard truths in a panel discussion that was wonderful, led by representatives from Two Sigma Ventures, that was Vili Ilchev, representation from First Mark Ventures from Beth Ferreira, Logan Bartlett represented Redpoint, and Matt Carrott represented CRV. It was moderated by Katie Roof of Bloomberg. And the collective advice, big surprise, cut your burn rates. Series A and B rounds, they said, have definitely slowed, and valuations are nowhere near their peak of 20 to 30x, which they were a couple of months ago. Startups are getting fewer term sheets to consider. Investors are allocating their funds for dry powder for companies that they already have in their portfolios. They're not looking for fresh meat, really, was kind of the message. And one of the things that surprised me was that down rounds were forecast to become a normal trend. So we'll have to watch that space pretty closely. They also said that deals are taking much longer to close and people are not getting multiple term sheets. So it's kind of a one and done. The situation's a little different for people that, or companies, I should say, that are going through their seed round investment stage. There was a panel discussion moderated by Jordan French of Grit Daily News. And he was met on the panel by Jenny Fielding of The Fund, John Soberg of MS&A&D Ventures, and Magali Charbonneau of Innovia. All of them embraced a general sense of optimism, but we heard the phrase shaky times and things like that. They all advised the startups to really grow into their valuations because during the bubble, so many of these valuations are overinflated that companies are going to have to do a lot of legwork to rise up to them. And that's going to be extremely challenging given some of the burn rates that we've heard about. The other thing that they talked about, of course, beyond the conserve cash and cut those burn rates down, was that second-time founders and Y Combinator startups were getting huge valuations, even though they had no real product. The same was true for some of the new and emerging spaces like Web3, NFTs, Metaverse, all of that sort of stuff where people kind of glomped onto the bandwagon, if you will. And then as a result of all of that and kind of a little bit of too much of an overzealous appetite for those new things and for founders that had done it once that maybe companies and investors would be able to strike it gold again a second time, people wrote a lot of checks. And the problem is that a lot of founders have exited and there's a lot of loss over in this space. But, of course, because there has to be optimism, all of the investors here, with respect to the seed stage investors, all echoed the same thing. Stay optimistic, people are writing checks. In fact, the fund wrote 20 checks alone in this past quarter. So there is money out there. And again, you just might get more than one no or way more than you thought you were going to get before. But that doesn't mean that everyone is going to go against you. The same rules apply. Demonstrate that you've got product market fit, demonstrate that you're starting to get some traction, and demonstrate that you're starting to get a little bit of interest from companies who are willing to pay for your services, as well as investors who are interested in looking a little deeper to see if there is the potential there for some growth for them and for their LPs, their lending partners. So with that, I'm going to cap off here for today. We've just had a quick little update as to what's going on at Collision Conference. Live from Toronto, it's Loralyn Mears here, your host of The Grit Files. And how about that fantastic intro by Touch Circle?